Hello everybody, welcome to Movies by McManus, the channel where we break down movies, comics, TV, books, whatever type of media you're into, in the context of who created it and what effect it's trying to have on the world. This week we're going to be breaking down the 2019 film Parasite, directed by Bong Joon-Ho. Parasite follows the Kims, a poor family living in South Korea who one by one gain employment from the wealthier Park family by lying about their qualifications and tricking the Parks into firing their current houseworkers. Things take a turn when the Kims find out that the former housekeeper was keeping her husband in a secret apartment in the basement. Things become violent when the husband attacks the family, killing their daughter Jessica, and in a rage, Mr. Kim kills the husband and then Mr. Park himself. So let's take a look at Bong Joon-Ho's other work and explore the deeper meaning behind Parasite, and try to answer the question, why did Mr. Kim kill Mr. Park? While Bong Joon-Ho has been famous in Korea for years, he hasn't fully been recognized in America until fairly recently. His past movies have themes of wealth inequality, and the lower class fighting against the upper class in confrontations that more often than not turn violent. In a lot of Bong Joon-Ho's films, the rich believe that the poor should know their place, and not step too far away from it. Or, as it's referred to in Parasite, crossing the line. The Park family expects their servants to be comfortable in their house, but not too comfortable. To be happy to have a job, but not to bring their personal problems into the house. This is referred to by Mr. Park as crossing the line. And in several scenes throughout the movie, the rich and the poor characters are shot with literal lines separating them. This is not just the Parks ignoring the problems of their workers, but ignoring the problems of the poor in general. They separate themselves from the lower classes, who, in their eyes, are only there as servants. And when a worker is fired by the Parks, it's usually because in some way or another, they brought the problems of poverty into the house. Mr. Park's driver is fired when the Kims frame him and make it seem like he's been having sex in Mr. Park's car. While this would be enough of a reason to be fired on its own, what disgusts the Parks more than actually having sex in their car is their suspicion that the girl may have been high on drugs. More specifically, methamphetamine, a cheap drug that is most associated with the poor. Later, the Parks fire their housekeeper when it's suspected that she might have tuberculosis, a disease that mostly affects the poor communities. These are clear examples of crossing the line, bringing a lower class problem like drug addiction or disease into the house where it can't be ignored. In fact, Mrs. Park says she didn't even realize people still got tuberculosis, showing how cut off from working class problems the Parks really are. When the Kims are eventually all employed by the Parks, the only complaint that the Parks have against them is their smell. The Kims have what's described as a sub-basement smell, which they can't get rid of. Sub-basement apartments are cheaper apartments that are common in Korea, specifically in Seoul, where this movie takes place. And the sub-basement smell is described by Mr. Park as something that a lot of poor people have on them. To the Parks, this smell is the only thing about the Kim family that crosses the line, or reminds them of the poverty that they are sheltered from. In some scenes, Mr. and Mrs. Park even cover their nose around the Kims. Perhaps a metaphor for the Parks trying to ignore the Kims' problems and the problems of the lower class. And so we see the main concern of the Park family, to keep the problems of the poor out of their house where they can be ignored. And this really is the main crime of Mr. Park. He's not actively trying to cause harm to the Kims, But it's his indifference to the Kims' problems that shows us he doesn't really view them as people. Late in the film, the Parks host a party the day after a thunderstorm, which floods parts of Seoul, including the Kims' sub-basement apartment, causing them to lose almost everything that they own. But the Parks still expect the Kims to come to work, and are completely oblivious to the flooding in the poor areas of Seoul. Mrs. Kim even calls the rain a blessing since it cleared the sky up, showing how sheltered and worry-free her life really is. So we talked about the conflicts between the Kims and the Parks, but the movie also shows how poor families fight with each other, usually for the right to work for a rich family, and sometimes in very nasty ways. The Kims trick each of the Park's former workers into getting fired, and when Mr. Kim thinks of the driver he replaced and wonders if he found a new job, his daughter tells him not to think of the driver, but to think of their family instead. When the family discovers the housekeeper's husband in the basement, this metaphorical fighting turns into physical fighting, and leads the Kim's son, Kevin, to attempt even murdering the housekeeper's husband. Now, violence clearly isn't the only option here. When the housekeeper's secret is first found out, she tries to appeal to the Kim family to let her husband stay in the basement, asking them to show mercy on a fellow member of the working class. But the Kims do not have the same sense of class unity that the housekeeper apparently does. They're just trying to get by, and the housekeeper and her husband are simply in the way. There's almost a dark irony to this situation. We have two poor families fighting each other for the right to serve a rich family who could not care less about their problems. And now we come to the ending. And the final question, why did Mr. Kim kill Mr. Park? At the end of the movie, the housekeeper's husband attacks the Kim family during the Park's backyard party. The Kim's daughter Jessica is killed, and Mr. Kim kills the housekeeper's husband. Afterwards, Mr. Park turns the dead husband's body over, holding his nose from the smell. It appears that the husband has the same sub-basement smell that the Kims have. And it's this moment that Mr. Kim decides to kill Mr. Park. Mr. Kim realizes that in the eyes of Mr. Park, him and this man are the same. Just poor workers who are only there to serve him. Now, Mr. Kim could have stabbed Mr. Park in a final show of class unity, or just in a fit of rage, after sacrificing so much to try to appease a man and a family who in the end will always look down at him. So what did you think of Parasite? And did Mr. Park really deserve it in the end? If you have anything to say about this movie or about Bong Joon-Ho as a director, feel free to comment below. And if you like this video, subscribe to our channel, check out our podcast, and follow us on social media at Movies by McManus. I'm your host, Greg. Have a good night.